So what I want to do now is introduce my guest tonight, Peter Leyden. He's the founder of Reinvent Futures, and we're going to discuss this very different but potentially much better future that we're all going to be facing. So let me tell you about Peter. Peter Leyden, the man here to my left, has spent his entire career in pursuit of the constantly evolving answers to four key questions. What's really going on today? What's probably coming in the next 10 years? What's possible to achieve in the next 25 years? And what we should do now to help make that all happen. Peter started his career as a journalist and a foreign correspondent in Asia. And he traveled to 50 countries and saw all sorts of different ways that people solve all sorts of different problems. He was here at the beginning of the digital revolution right here in South Park, as was I, when the exciting time of organic and Vivid and Wired. In fact, Peter was the managing editor of Wired magazine, and then moved on to having built that extraordinary network of technologists and entrepreneurs and innovators and creatives, intellectuals and academics. He moved on to work with Stuart Brand, who I think many of you know. If you don't know Stuart Brand, he was part of the Merry Pranksters in the old days. He then wrote a fantastic book called How Buildings Learn, and in much later years, he of course is the Whole Earth Catalog, and then founded was one of the founders along with Kelly. Kevin Kelly. So many Kellys, so little time. Of the Long Now Foundation, and Brian Eno is also a founder of the Long Now Foundation. If you haven't been to a Long Now Foundation event, I so highly recommend it. Look up their stuff on YouTube too. Boy, does it paint both it paints the complicated future we face as well as the promise of that future if we can master it. Just some great stuff. So he's written two influential books. The one that first turned me on was called The Transformation, about the move from the fossil fuel driven world to the electrical and clean energy driven world, and then has previous to that wrote The Long Boom when he was still at Wired, which was dangerously prescient, and you can tell us a little bit about that, about all the things that have come to pass, including this pandemic that we've just all been through, but has now written something called The Great Progression, and that's what interested me and why I'm glad that you're all here today, because the Great Progression is going to mean so many things for society, for government, for business, and for the people who work in these businesses and shape these businesses, the entrepreneurs, the leadership teams. Brands are part of the future, part of the bright future, because they are so influential. People do things that they wouldn't normally do just because a brand tells them to. Some of that's good. Some of that is bad, especially when it happens on January 6th. He's going to be leading a series at the Ferry Building at Shack 15, if any of you have been there, on the Great Progression. And so please welcome Peter Leyden. Woo! So Peter, the Great Progression, I mean, I think that we're going to need a little bit of a backstory with the Long Boom and the transformation, and then moving into the Great Progression. But tell us a little bit about your past and about how you came to not predict the future, but to do what you call speculative journalism, and what that means for the people here.
But before I go into this little thing, that you want to do that,
just a quick one, yeah.
Well, I worked with the founders of Wired magazine. I came here in the very early days of the digital revolution, and it's very interesting how many parallels are happening now with this new generative AI revolution that's happening, which we can get into a little bit later. But at the time, what I realized and what we realized at Wired was that people have no real way of rigorously or systematically thinking about the future. Or if they do, it defaults to negative. Because everyone can figure out how things can screw up, how things can go wrong, how people can do this. It's like easy to create a negative scenario of the future, and that's what everyone does. And then there's a bias in the media to kind of go negative and kind of just say disaster, disaster, disaster. It's, politicians have to say things are going wrong so I can solve it. Anyhow, there's baked into our culture a negative kind of framework. But that said, there's a lot of tools that have been developed since World War II, frankly. Stuart Brand's been among those collecting ways to do this, and I've learned he's a great mentor of mine. But anyhow, there are ways you can actually more systematically think about the future. And there are ways that can more accurately get more prescient about what's probably coming. And it's in that period in Wired that we saw this huge need. Like, people didn't know, like, okay, what is a digital economy? Like, how would that even work? Or like, what's an Amazon? Like, how will these startups amount to anything? Or like, why would anyone want to read news on the internet? Like, why would that's not? Or no one's ever going to give their credit card on the internet. I mean, literally, these were things that we were doing all the time. Like, and you guys from the early days can remember these things.
Remember that?
Yeah, I remember in the early days of the internet. I was actually it was shown to me by my brother-in-law at Digital. He took me in after hours, like, you got to see this. And he showed me the thing, and it drew this gray page with a picture of some engineer. And I said, this is the world's slowest database. and he said, no, my computer talked to a computer in Annapolis that talked to a computer in London that talked to a computer in Tokyo that talked to this guy's computer, and this guy's computer sent what I asked it to send back, which was this page, just now. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
which, now it means nothing. It's but it was astonishing. Yeah.
So with that context, what Wired kind of cut me loose to do, and I worked with a world-class kind of futurist at the time called Peter Schwartz, who also founded a company with Stuart Brand called Global Business Network, where I eventually worked. And they were famous for scenario planning. So they had all kinds of techniques about how to think through the future, and they spent a lot of time with, we spent a lot of time with advanced government agencies as well as a lot of corporations trying to think that through. So anyhow, we applied these techniques to what was happening in the early 90s to think through, okay, what would this digital economy look like? How could it actually play out? And then we also had to layer it over, because we also kind of underappreciate that was just the beginning of globalization too. The Soviet Union just fall, basically China was just starting to open up. And people didn't understand what that was going to be like. Okay, how does that matter? Why would that make any difference? And like, how is this going to work? And so with Peter and myself, we spent a year basically working on this, and basically came out with this cover story in Wired called The Long Boom, which was really looking at the next 25 years that kind of laid out what at the time was what's seen as a very hugely optimistic and very kind of positive story of what could actually happen as these things started to scale and what would happen in the next 25 years. And it was attacked. The mainstream media went nuts on it. Anyhow, there's a lot of interest around it. Eventually, it went into a book. I went into multiple languages, went into China, all kinds of stuff. I spoke for like a decade around that book, as Schwartz did. And the thing is, and we were talking about the story of the world, America and the world to 2020. And so right around 2020, we you go back to the book, you go back to the story, and pretty much what we said pretty much played out. And so the internet been kind of going nutty around 2020 when they were kind of going back to this. And they were saying, Jesus Christ, this is close. And then we even had done 10 things that could go wrong in the next 25 years that could slow down what we called the long boom. It was basically a long technology boom and a long economic boom with that globalization that would create, in our context, what we thought of as a much better world over time. And so there's 10 things that'll also probably happen, including with all this global interconnection. We're probably going to see a global pandemic, and it could actually rival what we saw in the influenza thing in 1918. Anyhow, boom, we got that.
Thank you.
Anyhow, there's a bunch of them. Now, so the point is, you can actually use these techniques to think, because you think that through. It's like, if all these planes start going and we start connecting and everybody's, you know what, these germs are going to get around. You know what, something's going to happen, and damn, the whole world's going to fall on this thing, and we're not going to have adapted to some. Anyhow, there's just ways to think in every one of these specifics like that. So it's very prescient. So the Great Progression, in short, is essentially the sequel to this that looks to the next 25 years using pretty much the same techniques based on this pretty good track record. And so we're going to take a little time in a minute here where I'm going to give you the gist of it so you kind of understand kind of the through lines there. And very quick so we don't get too bogged down in it. Because I do hour-long talks on this. I've been all over trying to talk about this next thing. And this is based on another magazine piece called The Great Progression that's similar in length to what the Long Boom originally was and could end up as a book at some point. But right now, it's making a call in the next 25 years. So we'll get into some of that today.
Yeah. So the Great Progression interested me because it especially for people, those of you who are marketers or entrepreneurs, it makes it so that it gives you the framework to think about the future, which is going to be, it's already very, very different, today than it was a few years ago. It's going to be dramatically different in just a few years already. I'm sure, I mean, I should not even ask, to raise your hands, who hasn't played with ChatGPT yet, right? Just seeing the nascent AI, finally everybody coming to grips with climate change, noticing the shifting demographics. There's just so much going to impact how people run businesses, how they create brands, and how consumers respond. It's going to be nothing short of astonishing. So
Astonishing, but I would frame, and back to you, and again, I'll make a little case in a bit, but although nothing like a full hour-long talk thing with a lot of data, but I think it's going to be better.
Yeah.
I think people really underappreciate how many very positive technologies are being developed that have some dangers, but also have incredible potential to help give us superpowers we never had before. But it's not just that. There's a lot of big trends that are actually playing out that I think are very positive. Even things like politics that gets people so depressed and feeling doom and gloom and trapped, like we'll never get out of it. I have a way of playing this out in the story, and I'll give you a little gist of it here. How I actually see that also is working itself out, and is well on its way to working itself out. And that I think, that in many respects, one of the things that's happening, and again, the quick slides I will show this, is like the best way to think about this is we are between two kind of historical eras. And one of the reasons we're so gloom and doom is basically all the systems and subsystems of that past era are breaking down and are not working. And all the systems that are going to supersede them, and all the meta system that'll kind of define the next 40 years or so, those are not mature enough to really be crystal clear to people. Just the way, like in the early 90s, it wasn't clear, like how does the digital economy work, or how does globalization work? So you kind of have fears about it, and you think, okay, well, this is bad, or we don't like it, or it's going to be nothing, or all that kind of reaction we're getting now. And that's basically because it's where we are in this developmental cycle, essentially, of this next system. And so what the Great Progression is trying to do is explain to you what is that next system. What is already well on its way to taking off. It's just not really has enough traction yet to really be obvious to everyone, the way now it's obvious on all the internet stuff, right? But it wasn't obvious that, everybody was going to have a wireless cell phone with a personal computer walking around and, talking through. It's like people were like, how will we get bandwidth over the air? It's like,
Exactly.
that doesn't even make sense. It's like we can barely get it over the telephone line, and it's got this little modem going. It's like but you could actually see how that could play out. It's like, yeah, I could. Anyhow, so the point is, you got to paint the picture of what's possible, and that's what I think we're particularly at these junctures, and we're into one of the junctures now, and it's going to get clearer and clearer in the 2020s here, just like it got clearer and clearer in the 90s. And then we're just going to scale this thing, and that's what I'm trying to preach to everyone here. Is we're in that frame.
So to flip the script, basically, because right now, I mean, the mainstream media picks up on this, and they're like, "Oh, you're out of a job, right?
Yeah.
Wait till it takes over the earth and turns us all into paper clips." Clippy. But at the same time, as you pointed out, I remember when the internet came out. I said, my God, these websites are ugly. We've got to build more beautiful websites. And we built a few really beautiful websites, but they took so long to load. I actually said, you know what? This thing's going nowhere. This is
Back then?
the internet, it's going to be a passing fad because nobody's going to use it. It's too slow.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, Microsoft famously had the brand vision for a PC on every desk and in every home, right?
Yeah.
And which not only came true, we have them, in our pockets, in our ears. They're everywhere now. So give us the great progression. Give us the encapsulation and how help dispel some of these gloom and doom thoughts.
Do you want me to do that with the slides?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So yeah, folks, you can all see that there, but so I'm going to go flip through this quick. That's also my company here. It's called Reinvent Futures. It's kind of a strategic. You could think of it as a strategic foresight firm. But these are the 4 key questions, really, that I work with. And I spend a lot of time with senior kind of C-suites, boards, and that kind of level of advising, but I also do a lot of public speaking around this at conferences, all kinds of stuff. Now, one of the things I was talking to you about this old system, basically everyone, just from the demographic here, that basically you could say the last 40 years that most people here have kind of lived their career, there's been essentially a meta system and a bunch of subsystems that work together. And I'm going to give you the quick version of that. Basically, we had this huge challenge of terrorism. From the eyes of America and the West, it was a kind of a terrorism was change. And why was that? Well, one is the energy we had was absolutely carbon. There was no other kind of energy source. Transportation, flat out internal combustion engine, powered by that carbon. Culture was totally dominated by baby boomers. I'm a tail end boomer. I'm
a tail ender too.
that little thing. But it was essentially all brands, everything was kind of reorganized in every stage of the way that huge generation was doing the culture. Politics tend to be more conservative because despite kind of the Bay Area feeling here or kind of the 60s vibe, actually boomers were quite conservative in terms of the 60-40 split on their politics. Economics was more about empowering the private sector. Because of that, basically, capitalism was all about the shareholder. We're just going to maximize profit for that. Work was all physical. There was no kind of sense beyond that. Production was industrial. We were perfecting a thing that happened in the Industrial Revolution. And geopolitics was in the Middle East because we had to get the oil to kind of deal with the terrorism, to kind of blah, blah, blah. And this whole system was just the flywheel that just kept going. And everybody understood that. The media understood that. Politicians had answers for that. Everybody expected that's the world. That world is, I would go so far as to say, it's over. I mean, it's not totally over, but every single one of those things is broken down. It's
pretty over.
It's gone. It's kind of lost its energy. It's kind of the past. There's still a lot hanging on there. But anyhow, what's fascinating in the kind of terms of the bigger picture is you take every one of those categories I basically told you is they've been replaced by nascent systems that are coming online here. So we've got the meta challenge is clearly climate right now. We've got energy is absolutely shifting to clean, and the numbers are just astounding on that. Transportation, who would have thought the entire auto industry in the world is basically now just going. I do a lot of speaking to legacy auto industries because they're like, now they're not fighting it. They're just like, damn, how can we make money on this thing? Anyhow, culture is now millennial centric. That's why all these Disney and everybody else is all kind of into climate and into diversity and all that, is because they don't give a rip about the boomers, but what they think about that. Politics is going to be increasingly more progressive, I would say, and I'm going to make a quick thing on that here. Economics, much more bigger role for the public sector. We're already seeing the early part of that with just what happened in the last few years here. Capitalism is all much broadening to the stakeholder, much broader kind of sense of moving the wealth through work is, as we just been discussing half here, virtual and not all virtual. I think there's going to be a balance. Production is going to be more biological. This is where synthetic biology and some other stuff, if we had more time, we can talk about that, but this is going to, and Bayer is ground zero for a lot of that. This is a hugely important thing, biological engineering and how that's going to replace industrial engineering. And geopolitics is Asia because of China, because of the big populations for climate change. And that entire thing is now the future. And so that basically is the 2020s. That is the 2020s, and we are all smack in the middle of that thing. And we're desperately trying to wrap our heads around what is that next thing. And so for the point of view of your brands or point of view of your marketing, it's exact, you want to get to that green side as fast as you possibly can because everything else on the other side is basically going to collapse.
Yeah.
Or pretty fast. Now, people can push back on that, but I'll give you a bunch, and I'll give you quick things, and we got a little time here, so let me tell you. So basically, one of the ways you can play out how this works is because we're all in technology, or in the world of technology. It's this technology adoption curve thing is really important. But here's why it's so important and how it moves so fast. Is this thing is very common. You see this thing a lot. But here's the key, and this is the thing for people working on the future, is the tipping point. Is when does it tip? And because once you understand it's going to tip, you can actually really quickly understand where it's going. And so the tipping point also is, before the tipping point, there's a disappointment in how things work. Like, oh, this cell phone ain't working, or this internet's too clunky, like you were just saying. And then, but once it clicks and it works, boom, it just goes exponential and goes crazy. And that's the thing. And here's the other thing about it, and this is in the marketing world, is people will hold on to the old system for as long as they possibly can. They get it, they don't want to mess with it. It's like, I get it. And then there's a new technology that comes around that little thing, and it's not enough to kind of people, or not just technology, maybe a new trend, new trend or something. You get just enough people that try it and say, oh my God, this is so much better. And then it goes, whoosh. That's a paradigm shift. And that is your marketing world. And that is what's going to shoot across that big canyon I just laid out to you. That thing is happening right now. We're in the middle of that crazy paradigm shift. Now, to keep going on this, it gets even better, because here's what's going to happen here is, the long boom was driven on one world historical technology, which is computer technology, so the digital revolution. That was a big deal. Totally changed the world in 25 years. But what we've now got is we've got 3 world historical technologies happening all in the next 25 years. And one is the next phase of the information technology. Sorry, just going back there. Let's just keep this one. So the next phase of the information technology, which is basically generative AI. Well, generative AI is the opening up of what essentially will be the age of AI. And AI is going to be, it's a continuation of what we got in the digital revolution, but it is taking it to a whole other plane, and we'll touch on that in a little bit second. The second thing, though, is we're going through a world historical energy transformation. The world has never been through a change in its energy source so fundamentally in so short a time. If you can't make money in this transition, then you don't know how to do business. Because, and this is what's finally clicking, even with the red states, and all these people are like, holy shit, I got a battery farm here. And it's like, oh my God, I got all this, it's gone. That debate was a debate, now it's over. It's tipped. That thing has happened. And the third one, which is just starting in a deeper way, and it's a harder one to explain, and it takes a little more, but it's essentially biological engineering, basically synthetic biology. We have now figured out we understand genomes, and we understand how to manipulate genes cheaply and easily, and so we are going to essentially engineer living things. Biological engineering is going to essentially replace, in many ways, physical engineering. And so a lot of the things we make, the materials we do, all kinds of things is going to be biologically engineered this century, and it's starting now. So anyhow, you've got not one, but two, but three. You got a triple whammied world historical boom, like meaning they'll look back on this in 500 years ago. Oh, that's when AI started. Oh, that's when they went clean energy. Oh, that's when biological engineering started. It's like we're hitting 3 at the same time. And so that's 3 tech booms. But along every tech boom, that's long-term economic growth. It's all based on new technologies, new industries, new jobs, new wealth, all the stuff that gets created. And we're sitting here, just put it in even more perspective, we're at ground zero in arguably all 3 of those, but certainly 2 of the 3 of those, we are at ground zero here. The energy is a little bit more dispersed, but even that's pretty good. So if you keep going on this, just on this little whirlwind tour here, there are certain things that you can then just think about, what I call the inexorables. They're inexorably going to happen under any scenario. You can't stop them, and you can maybe slow them down a little bit or channel them. But this is just going to happen. One thing that's happening is, from a marketing point of view, you should be aware, is universal connectivity. Every single human on the planet is going to be connected this decade. We got lower satellites now. It's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. There's 3 billion people still have not been connected to the internet on the planet, but that's going to happen this year. Not this year, this decade.
And that's less than 1%.
No,
right?
it's 40%.
40, but 3 billion people, how many people on the planet?
It's just turned to 8. We just hit 8.
8 billion.
I think we just hit 8 billion. But we're at well over 60% now. We're at about 65, and so it's 35%. Anyhow, the point being is, everyone will be connected with high bandwidth, cheap connections from all over. That's one thing that's happening. Second thing is ubiquitous AI. Now, I've been doing this thing for 3 years here. This is before the generative AI thing. But essentially, it was coming, and you could see it coming. And ubiquitous AI means it's going to be cheap, accessible AI to infuse everything we do, that humans do, at everywhere and anytime. And it's not going to control our lives, but I'm just saying that thing is going to be like electricity. It's going to be seen eventually like electricity. Like, of course, you need AI to do that. Just like we don't even think about electricity. Every single room on the planet has one, right? It's like we're going to have. It seems weird to think like that, but just like it thought weird in the early 2090s that we all were going to be connected wirelessly and connected at all times. Like people are like, how can that possibly be? It's like I'm on a phone. It sucks. I can't see anything. Anyhow, the point is that has big implications. Other one is that is going to accelerate innovation, which is a good thing because we got a lot of problems to solve, but there's a whole way to talk about that if we have more time. We're going to transition to clean energies. I mentioned some of that. There's a lot of proof of that. I can just throw the numbers. I won't because we don't have time, but electric mobility, it's playing out unbelievably beautifully. That's just going to happen. Genetic understanding, we're basically mastering that in all ways. We actually know increasingly how the genome, everyone's genome, things genomes now are working. We're now going to start, this CRISPR thing you've all heard about is like cheap, easy editing, so we're going to hit that. Now there'll be ethical issues and all kinds of stuff, just like there's going to always be issues on these new technologies. But that thing is going to happen. Generational shift, I'm going to talk a little bit about that briefly because that affects marketing the most in the remaining time here. And then it's going to change the politics with new majorities. And this is where we're going to go fast here because we get another 5 minutes here, but I just want to do it fast. So this ubiquitous AI thing, I would just tell you, because I'm spending all my time now with these young 20-somethings, 30-somethings in this. It's just astonishing, actually, what's happening here. It's very, very, very reminiscent of the early 90s. I mean, it's like weird. I'm like the OG, the old guy, or what they call original gangster. They're kind of like, so they'd ask me, like, really? I mean, some of them weren't even born yet. They're going, damn.
Yeah, that's you're like, when were you born?
It's like, oh, no, you weren't there.
2001?
But, again, I don't wish we had more time here, but one way to think about it is for the first time in human history, are hitting a point where anything that needed human intelligence can now be at least approached as possible to mechanize or for a machine to do. We went through a breakthrough in the Industrial Revolution when we had mechanical engines. We said, holy shit, a human or a horse could only do so much. We got an engine, like, holy shit, we can do 200 horsepower, right? We're hitting that but we haven't been able to have machines, never been able to do an intelligent thing. We've now crossed that threshold. And so now it's smart things. The machines can be smart. So what is it going to hit? Every one of those prices that went up in the last 20 years is all related to labor. Yes. And that's because we didn't know how to automate college tuition, childcare, medical care, housing. Weirdly, we still build houses with humans. We haven't mechanized it. The point is every one of those is going to be hit somehow. Meanwhile, everything that has been automated, like cars are the same price now. You get more value for price now than 25 years ago. It's like, why? Because they're built by robots. And a few humans. So anyhow, think about that as what's going to hit. It's going to speed up innovation because it's a superpower that I'll give you one example. There's a coder I know, a good friend of mine actually, a pretty good coder. He said he's been monkeying with ChatGPT for basically the last month. He said, it's making me somewhere between 30 to 300 times more productive as a software engineer. 30 to 300 times more productive that one guy can do in the space of a month.
Is that image created with AI?
That one, these aren't actually, although I've used some of them now in some of my talks. I'm just doing a few quick ones. One of the things that also it's fascinating is because their language, and I've been using this for years, but it's worth using now. The machines are now going to master nuanced languages, and they're going to connect the languages. So the whole world has had to get crammed into second language of English. By the way, there's not even 500 million people are native English speakers, everyone here. We are the super kind of elite, easy street people that never had to do it. But those are the other languages, right? But these tools are going to be able to let any of us over video or basically with a button in our ear basically talk Arabic and talk Chinese and Hindi and whatever. It's you can do whatever. It's already happening, but it's going to be perfected. It's still not as nuanced as it's going to be. But what happens when that opens up those channels? It's going to be crazy amount of innovation. So a couple little things about that. There's a kind of new frame of like abundance, which is a new thing to think about. It's a little nuanced here, but I want to just do one quick reason of it. If you take AI and think about this as a super tool, and you think, oh, if that guy who's 300 times more productive could do something, think about applying that in all these different fields. Then you start to think, wow, we can make things a lot cheaper, and when you make things cheaper, they become more abundant. Mm-hmm. So things that we actually thought were impossibly expensive, and I'll give you two here. Housing and now is expensive and basically is super expensive, and education, right? Mm-hmm. And so you think higher education, like people are just gotten to be ridiculous. Well, this is interesting because you could actually see very quickly AI actually hitting this next 25 years. One is you don't think of it with housing, but here's what's going to happen, I would argue. Just today, I think it was announced that now crews can basically go 24 hours a day in driverless taxi here. This is going to be a thing in the next 25 years, and what we're going to do, I would predict, we're going to lose individual car ownership. So what you're going to do is say, I need the van for soccer practice, I need the SUV to go, and you can jump in and maybe drive it for yourself, because hey, I like to drive once in a while. But you don't need to own it and sit in the parking lot, because a third of all cities is devoted to freaking parking spaces. You can take a third of a city's back. So could you build affordable housing? You bet you could. We can totally redo these things. Anyhow, it's one of these kickers. And the education one is, it's already, you can see it if you played with ChatGPT. I mean, you're talking to essentially a tutor who could do all the low feeding stuff of profs and grad students and correcting papers and telling the kid for the 20th time how to solve that math problem. I mean, it's just going to really be able to lower these costs. So anyhow, quick ways to do that. And without going too far, I want to just end here with a few things on the generational thing. So, because your market is, and when I talk to marketers, it's, look at the numbers here. This is one where I'm going to show you the numbers. And it's pretty astounding when you think about it. This is America in 2020, essentially by generation. And everyone that, it's every year represented, and those blocks there are
I feel my youth slipping away.
well, not only slipping away, but the boomers are literally dying off. And that block of the gray there is retirement, basically, roughly. So when you think about the guts of the economy, you think about who's going to buy shit and who's going to work and do stuff. It's those people in the middle. So what do you see right now? It's the millennials are the dominant generation happening right now, right? Gen Xers, I'm sure there's some in here, smaller generation, don't have quite as much weight. But anyhow, the point is, the boomers are going. But just push it to 2030 here, and you'd hit that same thing. The boomers are all retired and continuing to die off. Look at that Gen Z behind them now with the millennials. Those are, and they're basically a double-barrel generation. They have very aligned kind of values in terms of climate, in terms of DEI, diversity stuff, in terms
Gen
of...
Z and millennials.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you essentially got two double-barrel generations that whatever they want to do, we're going to do that. We're not going to listen to that dying front edge guy, kind of thinking about...
This is 7 years from now.
Yeah.
This is 7 years. Talk about. This is not even long range planning at this point.
But this is another 10 years out, and it's whatever we do it's going to be run by millennials, Gen Z. Anyhow, that world, we got a run for 25 years here now of what do they want to do. We're going to do that. And by 2050, we don't know what their kids are going to be like. They might react on them and be different. But, anyhow, the point is that's demographics. And that's just, you can predict the future by demographics. It's like, these are real numbers. I mean, maybe you'll get a little life extensions.
Name for the grade group coming through yet?
Well, that's the kids. We don't know. They're not born.
don't
It's
yet.
the
They don't have a
25th.
name yet.
It's 25th.
Wow.
Yeah.
We've run out of letters.
Yeah, we run.
So this is an interesting thing. When bringing it back to sort of a branding perspective, in the auto industry, the whole concept of horsepower is so it's powerful, right? It is so influential, and I have to admit that even as somebody who grew up, with a 350 horsepower Buick GS, whatever. I didn't know what horsepower was, right? I mean, but really, there's 300 horses in here.
That is right.
Yeah, you got 300 horses under this hood, right? Yeah, you got 300 horses. 350 horses. That's a 400 horse over there. There's 400 horses.
Yeah.
But suddenly, it's like it's not horses, it's brains, right?
Yeah.
And so our car is going to say, this is a 500 brain power car. I mean, it literally, the term horsepower is going to become meaningless.
Well, it's related to a physical term. I mean, it made a lot of sense back then when you knew what a horse could pull that much of a wagon, and they said, oh, that is it started not 10 horsepower, and then it was 20 horsepower, it got to 240, but it made sense. It was trying to make sense to people's, like, what it would have taken with something we knew before. And I think we're going to actually have to do that now with the kind of this breakthrough in intelligent machines. We're going to have to think, we have to rethink, like, what did we think things would take? I mean, marketing, anything to do with media, anything to do with communications, is going to go through this. Now, I will say, just quickly to jump into it, is I am not, again, I'm the positive reframe guy. I think the worry that everyone's going to be unemployed, no one's going to work, and all that is not true. Every one of these junctures, and I've been personally through many of these tech changes, And I've been historically reading, checking out on this for my entire career now, but reading this and watching this, is every single time we've introduced a new technology, it has not led to widespread kind of
Nope,
unemployment.
never.
It has essentially moved the humans up higher up the food chain in terms of problem solving. And the only constraint on what humans won't be able to do is like if we run out of problems, and we're not going to run out of problems, right? I mean, it's just going to happen. And so I think in many respects we shouldn't fear this. Now there will be some transitional thing, and there will be some people who will never make the transition. I mean, that stuff happens. But just really, it's really something I don't think we should embrace it in a different way and think about the ways now humans can get rid of so much drudgery. I mean, how many people do you know hate their jobs? I mean, you guys are in creative jobs, so maybe it's not that, but most Americans, like 80% of Americans hate their jobs, I mean, just go to a fast food thing, watch the person, it's like I went to an In-N-Out Burger and I looked in their back there, and there's like 20 people all dressed in red, going as fast as they can with kind of like, making, hamburgers. I was thinking, bring in the robots. I mean, those poor people, like who enjoys that job? They're going to want to do something different.
Well,
Anyhow.
but it translates to oh, hi, Diane.
I don't know if do we jump into the question?
Well, well, why not? Let's do a little free form, but
Do you have any thoughts about the like speciesism about this? Like, what about the isms, right? Like ageism, racism, sexism.
that's an interesting question.
Ism, like,
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. What about these isms that now currently define us? A lot of them are because of physical, not cognitive, or not creative or intellectual ability. They are isms that exist because of these industrial strictures, right? So it used to be that the people like, I'm not going to work. We're not going to work with the Polacks, right? We're not going to. We don't work with those guys. And then other people were like, we're not going to work with the mix. We're not going. And so they all had like these isms, these race isms, that they made it so that they couldn't work together because of these nationalist tendencies, and also then, especially those of us with a little gray hair, suddenly realize that we're not nearly as hot as we used to be from a job perspective, but otherwise we're totally hot. That these things may actually disappear.
Well, you're getting into politics away, and I do have a last little kicker on
right.
politics. Do you want me to do it?
Yeah, bring it
because
up.
this would answer this question, because the obvious thing to play out here is what happens when those people run the country, and that's already going to start. It's starting. It's happening. And so let me run the politics, because essentially what the politics does is, in a world of a big technology transformation, you can do it many ways. And we did the last 40 years, we said, hey, let's let a few entrepreneurs make an insane amount of money, and kind of engineers take a big piece, and keep people at minimum wage, and that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is you could say, in this time we're going to actually move money through society much differently. We're going to actually make sure everyone gets taken care of, and we have kind of universal basic income or whatever. All kinds of ideas you could do, right? And so that's why I just want to mention this, because this is my most controversial thing, and I get literally in conferences I get people like attacking me basically, but I think it's a really compelling thing that I would mention for particularly a home crowd here, which is basically what's happening is, particularly around demographics, is we're essentially forming a new political majority in this country, and basically I would say through the entire West. And what's happening basically is not just the pure age thing, but both these generations, millennials and Gen Zs, are 50-50 basically white and people of color, for one example. And you're watching essentially the fruits of this is America's two immigration booms. There was a great boom in the late 19th century, early 20th. That's that first one. It was throttled back after World War II to nothing, literally. So the boomers essentially were very white. The only diversity in the boomer generation was essentially black people left over from the slavery times. There was no immigration. And so, but what opened up in the 80s, essentially, it started to open up, and we had a second boom. And this is what Trump and them are reacting to. But now we got a huge cohort. And so what's happening now in America is essentially the percentage of white people is coming down. This is 2020 here, and as people of color go up. And essentially we're going to hit the entire country is going to be about, by 2045, whites will be a minority. This has already happened a long time ago, like 15, 20 years ago in California. Whites in California are only 35% of the population right now. 35%. And so I love California. It doesn't, it's like people freaking out about America going like, okay, it works fine. But anyhow, the point is, this is happening. So when you put this thing together, what I would say is there's two things that people forget about American history because you don't have the long enough view, is there's literally been a pendulum swing between two fundamental different eras. There's a conservative era and a progressive era. We call it, the last era, progressive, we call it liberal, but basically in long-term American history, these are the two ways that political scientists think about it. One is really more about, it's in the word conserve, or it's in the word progress. It's in essentially, and the both you can see as positive. One is more renewing, going back to the basics, and the other is reinventing and trying something new. Anyhow, this thing doesn't take a lot. All it takes in a 50-50 split of America, which is what we've had in the last 10 years, 2020, all you got to do is take 10% of the country and you got a 60-40 majority. And that's what we did the last 40 years. I am saying we are now going back to a 60-40 majority. And you're already seeing it. It's totally happened in California, which is a bellwether and a precursor. So the last time we had a progressive era was essentially the post-war world. That was the Great Society. That was the kind of New Deal, everything we know, right? Then in basically in 1980, we had the Reagan and Thatcher revolution. Yep. I would say Trump was the last gasp of that. And I'm strongly arguing around what I just said there. We are entering, just beginning, now entering essentially this period now. And so what you're saying was essentially a holdover of the 2010s. And I'll give you this last little bit here. By the way, California, since we're all Californians, every one of these, that was the Warren was a governor that started out there, became the Supreme Court guy that defined that era. Basically, Reagan was the governor here, defined that era nationally. Let's see what Gavin does. But the politics of California, I would say, we watch this to go national. Just watch this, and it might even be him itself. Now, here's the thing about your red state.
Turn back Roe v. Wade and bring that.
Okay, now here's what I'm saying. This is one thing people forget about. Republicans have lost the presidential popular vote 7 of the last 8 elections. 7 of the last elections. That's historically unprecedented in the entire United States. This is the high water mark of Republicans. It was the second Bush election. That was the only time they've won the popular vote. Right. And won. And look at the electoral count there too. It's very close, actually. This is the high watermark. This is Biden. What has happened? We are now flipping, the entire Southwest is flipping blue right now. And increasingly, we flipped Georgia deep south, right? This wasn't a fluke. This is Atlanta. These are young people living. And here's what I'm going to tell you, and I know you're screaming about Texas. Where are all these millennials leaving San Francisco? They're going to Austin. They're going to Miami. They're going to. These are turning blue. These are going to be battlegrounds, I would argue, in the next few days. And then this is going to define a different national politics. It's going to define a different politics. And I will just say, it's a debatable thing. We can talk about that. But I think people are too trapped in the last decade of crazy kind of trapped 50-50 politics. Look what's happening. The Republicans are getting their asses kicked. Except for the kind of, they're just getting rolled. And now they're going to put up Trump again? I'm telling you, this is what you get for historical shifts, where you get that 60-40 majority says, okay, I've had it with that other thing. We're done with that period. We did it in 1980, shifting the other way. I think we're going to do it this way. Anyhow, we can go into that all night.
I think that the 4 things we talked about here are sort of demographics that lead into politics. We've got climate change, which also, all this politics is going to be a crux of a lot of this stuff, no matter what. And we've got AI and we've got biological engineering. All of it has political implications, but all of it also has what I would call consumer implications, because people do what people follow brands. They tend to do what the brand tells them to do. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but rather that people identify, they say, I associate with this brand. So you might be a Chick-fil-A kind of person because you're conservative, or you might be a KFC person because you're much more progressive and urban. Hard to say, right? But you get the point that there's definitely a sense in every single thing that every company does with its brand that relates to what we're seeing here. And you mentioned Gavin, who actually, Gavin slept here. He didn't sleep here, but we did have a fundraiser for him back when he was a supervisor, right here. But it was very strange. but so the nice thing is we're all here in California, in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, which has an outsized role in brands, in politics, in policy, in technology. There's going to be, I think, without a doubt, like you said, it feels a lot like that weird era when here south of Market, which was, sex clubs and warehouses, and I mean, they used to run trains up and down the alleyways here when I first moved here, right? And then the internet thing came in. It was sparkling. A lot of bullshit, but it really was sparkling in its innovation and in the whole new ideas, the new ways of like spelling names for companies, of thinking what companies should be called. The whole idea. Remember, even companies like Apple, people are like, you can't call a computer Apple. You just can't do that. An apple's an apple. A computer's a computer. An apple can't be a computer, right? But that turned out to be not true at all. And so what do you see before we go to these questions? Because I know this group's going to have a lot of really great ones. Tell me, what do you see in terms of how companies are going to need to shift to appeal to this new demographic who are concerned about climate change, who are actually okay with AI? They're okay with technology in general, whereas boomers are very suspicious of technology and AI and biological
Well,
stuff.
I would say,
what's going to happen?
well, first of all, if you're in marketing, politics is a slow-moving glacier, right? But culture moves fast, and brands and marketing move fast with the culture, right? So, in my opinion, the culture's shift. It's done. It's over. Like why is Disney saying, doing its thing in Florida? It's not going to let go of it. A gay policy. It's not going to cave to climate change. They're not going to. It's like because they know basically all their consumers, all the people they got to work with, all the creatives they're going to deal with. It's like
Go woke or go broke.
Exactly.
It's that simple.
But no, but see, they won't. That's exactly right. It's the opposite. It's like. So I think what's interesting is, but the politics hasn't caught up. And so that's why there's this lag time on politics. We think, that'll crush,
Troglodytes are slow to learn.
So, but this is going to change this decade. But I would argue. But anyhow, the point being is, we've already seen this change, and you are playing it out right now. Now that's one thing is like marketing is the front, playing in the front lip of culture, and whereas the sensibility of the consumer, the young person, the buyers, which are younger, fashion, trends, all that stuff, right? And so you guys got your finger to that. I would just say it's tipped. It's not a debate anymore. It's like you can bet the farm on it. It's like now that's where we're going because there's no stopping that framework. There'll be some excesses still, and there's nutty lefty things that drive everyone crazy even. So it's not like everything in this direction is going to be crazy, is going to work out. But I would just say that decision's been made, and so now we're just flushing out what is the long-term play in those spaces. Politics is going to follow. It's happening now. Second thing I would say, though, is what you really were saying, which I think is really useful to think about, is like about every 2 years, the East Coast media, like New York Times, New Yorker, whatever, all of them, they love to take on. They love when something's floundering in San Francisco or LA or it's California. It's like, everyone's leaving San Francisco. It's over. It's like the end of the kind of great trip. They love doing those stories, right? It's always wrong. It's always wrong. I've been watching them because I'm in this journalism business, and every year they're told. For example, right now to be doing those stories is insane. It's like we are watching not just in the country, but in the world. The entire brain power around generative AI is literally within about a 5-mile radius of this place right here. There's a whole thing, they're calling it Cerebral Valley, is essentially all these people are starting to live in Hayes Valley. So Hayes Valley is getting kind of a nickname called Cerebral Valley. These houses are multiple people, and they're coming from all over the world now. It's like, because I'm at the Shack 50 club here, which is one of the ground zeros. I helped judge a hackathon a week ago, over the weekend, and 2 weeks ago as part of another one. It's like there's like hundreds of these people. They're going to the hackathons all weekend at the Shack or around in these other places. It's exploding in energy. Money's flowing back in here. It's like everything is kind of just buzzing at an incredible space right now. At the exact time that the Times was kind of writing from New York, it's like, oh, San Francisco's over. It's like San Francisco is, you always want to crash. The other thing is like, oh, the tech companies are laying off engineers. Yeah, they're laying off engineers because all the engineers also are fucking taking off and running to AI startups. I mean, it's like, it's essentially starting the whole cycle again. It's like they can't hold on to them now. And so, and they're pruning it a little bit because they were a little bloated over the thing, but there's no unemployment here. It's like everyone's still desperate for engineers. They're always desperate for engineers. So anyhow, the point is, what I'm saying is we're back in it again. And if you have your ear to the ground or you live here, you kind of feel it and see it. But the world hasn't figured it out yet. And it was the same thing in the early 90s, in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
It's like, and then eventually by the mid to late 90s, when I was at Wired Magazine, which is just right, here,
right
it's
there,
in the same place here, right on Third. I mean, we had TV crews coming from all over the world. The Dutch would be in there, the Japanese would be in there. I was on a regular, I remember, TV show every week. CBS News would basically have I'd do an interview of like the latest internet thing, that I had to talk, which would go out through the whole country.
JPEGs are going to take over the world.
Yeah, something like that. But I mean, it's because they finally caught up to like, there's this crazy thing happening and we don't have a clue about it. So now we got to go to San Francisco to figure it out. So anyhow, the point is, I would say, without overdoing it and being too full of hubris, I would just say, I would feel like, believe me, folks, I think we're back in another one of these crazy ground zero times. That is really going to be exciting. And it kind of relates to this series that I am going to be doing at the Shack, which you made allusion to. I am going to start May 24th is our first event there. It's going to be on what we're calling, we're going to explore the real implications of generative AI, and it's kind of a meeting of the minds. We're bringing people from all different networks together. We're going to do one in June, which is the positive potential of generative AI, to really think through the positive stuff before you get into the negative stuff. And then in July, we're going to do one on the actual risks, not the freaked out risks, but the actual risks, because those are three questions, but we want to do them in a kind of normalized way. We're going to do video of it, and we're going to do audio. We may be doing video. We're going to be doing audio. I'm going to be writing up a Substack column on this, essentially what we're learning along the way here, and so we're going to try to get these ideas out, but we're also going to try to cross-connect people, because it is a time, to be fair, nobody knows what's going on now. I mean, if anyone thinks they know what's going on around this, they don't. And even though people have been around for a long time, or the young bucks, they're all like reeling. They're just going, I have no idea where this is going or how it's going to work. I think it's too early, because you can't really play out this thing the way we can play out some of these other demographics. But I would say in the next 2 to 3 years, 5 years, we will have a really good handle on this, and we'll be well on our way to the next scale now.
And we're going to be at the center of it, and so that's what's so interesting. So let's open up to questions. Spencer.
Yeah, and thank you for hosting, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Wanted to go back to the beginning of the presentation where you were talking about sort of I call it the Venn diagram, for the geopolitical slide. You mentioned in the past we were looking to the Middle East for sort of geopolitical sort of conflicts or issues, whatever the case may be. And then you said looking forward we might be looking to Asia. Wanted to get your thoughts on, because I mean, we're starting to see the U.S. and Asia start to rush towards both LATAM and Africa for either natural resources or human capital. So why do you say Asia versus LATAM or Africa?
Well, I think Africa will be more of a battleground, but I guess I'm trying to think about it in the biggest sense, which is, which we didn't really get into, but my article basically does get into this. It's a 10,000 word article, so there's a lot of space to do this. The possibility of a Cold War with China was really one of the ways I really was.
It's already happening.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as yet. I think there's ways we can get off the Cold War track if we do the right things, but it's trending in a bad way. And so when I think about that, I mean, there's a lot of big things. If we're going to solve climate change, which is the ultimate challenge, one, you got to take the countries that have 1.5 billion people, India and China, have to figure in the equation. So that's one thing. That's what we got to think about from the world point of view.
And India's about to surpass China in growth, because China's aging population is basically putting it into a period of decline. And whereas India is going to be
so there's a kind of a big population problem, and then there's the Cold War with China. But your right point, which is actually Africa's going to be fascinating, because that's where the bulk of growth is going to happen. Economic growth often is driven by population, and most of the developed world is going to be cratering in population. And so this is one of the other things people kind of bemoan. We're going to be, the robots are going to take away our jobs, their AI is going to take away our jobs. They're going to save our assets, people. That is really what's going to happen. Is they're going to basically do a lot of things that we're not going to have people to do. Or the other thing I think is going to flip, another one of these things that everyone thinks, oh, immigration is dead here. It's like, no way, that's going to shift in the next 25 years. We're going to have a lot more immigrants coming in here, partly for the economic reasons. But anyhow, your point is well taken. I think there's a lot going to go on in many regions, but I would just say if you had to squeeze one thing down, where is the U.S. focused now? And you can kind of see it already with the Taiwan issue and China and all that. I just threw it up there. It's not to say there's other regions that aren't a big deal.
David?
Peter, hi, David McGrain. I also am very positive, so to hear yourself framed as a positive reframer, totally get it.
Yeah.
And yet,
There's that yet.
you mentioned superpowers for everybody.
Yeah.
And basically, humans are therefore going to be involved. Humans are infamous for screwing it up, for abusing it. For, if you look at social media, disinformation, superpowers were given to everybody and they abused it. So to the point where we can't believe anything. How is this going to be different?
That's a good question. Now, I'm not a Pollyannish, like, oh, everything's going to be hunky-dory, it's all great. So it's a good, well-placed point, and I agree with what you're saying. Just like when in my original Long Boom piece, I did 10 things that really worry me about the 25 years, and they all came true. Basically, I did in this latest article, I did 10 things that really worry me. And so we could go into some of those, but there are things that really worry me about the next. I mean, I think that there are a lot of risks involved in these superpowers getting in the hands of crazy individuals or, right-wing militias or whatever. I mean, there's a bunch of things you could get really freaked out about. But I guess where my role is, let's just put it this way. There's plenty of people spending a lot of time bringing up all the issues with these things. And so even though I acknowledge them and understand them and I'm aware of those, I just don't give a lot of airtime to them because I just think we have plenty of other people fleshing that out. My thing is what's missing in this is an appreciation of the opportunities here and the actual positive potential of these things. And I just think it's just human nature that we worry about things and we react by fear to things. It's like the rustle in the bushes, when we're walking through the savannah, we're all freaked out about it, right? So if you're la-di-da and just going forward, you'd be done, and there's your genes, they're done, But so I think there is a reason why we do that, but I think in this case, it's in a modern developed society, we've lost the muscle to kind of embrace and think through the positive, and I think we need more people doing that. That's what I do.
The other day, I was working with a climate tech startup who's one of our clients, and they're like, "We got to get this thing out. We got to get this, this email out or whatever." And I said, "Okay, well let's work on it." And I immediately tapped into ChatGPT and said, "Write me an email about these 3 things." And I said, "Okay, just give me a second." And we're all just like talking on a Zoom call. And I said, "Okay, I'm gonna put some in the chat. Tell me what you think." And they're like, "Yeah, no, that's good. I would change this. I would change that." But I took what was going to be a heartburn problem for me for an entire morning with a lot of back and forth, and with generative AI, I solved it just like that. And it took a little bit of addition, but it was a good thing. It was a really good thing. And in the end, again, this is a startup. They don't have the money to pay me to think for 4 hours about how to write an email, but it was done in 10 minutes. It's early
days. I mean, I think
it's early days. Yeah,
we got to think this through.
Yeah, people say that I couldn't pass the Singapore 6th grade test. I'm like, yeah, that's because AI is in kindergarten, right? As soon as it gets out of kindergarten, it's going to be in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. It's going to be in 6th grade before you know it, just like your own kids, right?
But it won't take over the world. It's not.
No, it's not going to take over the world. But it's going to make, like you said, it's going to save our bacon because the populations are declining in general, and population decline is not necessarily a bad thing. And so if this can take over a lot of that stuff that required lots of people, lots of brain power, that's not a bad thing, right?
Agreed. Totally agreed.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah, Leah.
So, well, about the GPT chat, that's been interesting. I do grant writers, and I feel certainly they can write this paragraph for me. But I haven't actually figured out how to leverage it yet so that it works for me. So far, I'm still not working yet, but it's probably not still. One of the things that concerns me when you talk about all these drudgery jobs and the AI can take care of it, and nobody wants the jobs. Yeah, I don't know, my job is creative and wonderful, but what about people's learning differences and intellectual disabilities? Like a lot of people, there's a lot of them, and pretty much of kids, so they, like some of these drudgery jobs are better for them. Like there's a big population of that, and so that I'm worried about those jobs. Like, what are they going to do? And I don't think I don't see how universal income is going to help that, because we just went through this whole experiment with government sending out money to people because of COVID, and like then we had inflation. So I don't know.
Things like generative AI may make it so that people who have things which we consider disabilities today, if they can learn, prompts, they can produce things, creative works that they may not have been able to produce before. I think it might actually
It's
have
interesting about that.
opportunities.
I know I'm a horrible artist, but I've been having fun with these, creating art that I could never have done anyhow. It's kind of
Some
interesting.
people
But
are better off making sandwiches.
yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Yeah. No, I don't want to. I want to take your point seriously. I don't know all the answers to this. I mean, I think this is the thing about when you start an early thing like this is everyone's starting to think through the implication of it. I would also say what you're just like you. I have not pushed it in a way that has really necessarily solved anything important for me in my own kind of work. So I think we're all just clearing our throats right now and trying to okay, what can we do? But I will say this, that I've been talking to a lot of people who have really thrown themselves at this and really tried to understand it, not just the coder town. I gave that one example. I'll give you another example of a guy who works for, let's just call it a big legacy tech company here, but it's more in the marketing space. And he put together a business plan, including the deck for it, did the market research for it, using this tool, using ChatGPT for it. He basically got an expert panel. He said he kind of created act as though you're an expert panel that would be kind of stress testing this business attitude. Where would you go? Where's the weak points? What would you say? He even had focus groupy kind of things. Like, given the kind of people that were basically trying to do with this business, how would they answer this kind of question stuff? Now, was it a real person? No, whatever. Anyhow, but what was interesting, by pulling everything off the internet, he said he pulled together a business plan in about 48 hours that he said, and he's had these budgets before, he said it would have taken McKinsey 6 months and I probably would have paid him $1.5 million. And he said I was able to do that. No, that's that point. But I was talking about your point about you haven't figured it out. I'm just saying, when you start to take your own thing and start to say, okay, how can it do me? That was the question you hadn't really done yet. Just saying, well, some of the people have done it because he was just a regular guy, he's not a coder, he's not anybody. He's a marketing guy. And he basically just said, oh, wow, I could actually get it to do some of these things. They started asking questions that presumably you folks do too, right? So anyhow, he did that. The one about the other person, I don't know, the sandwich shop stuff. I mean, maybe, there's another way to think about it. And again, we don't know the question, how it works out, but maybe authenticity, or, you want the human-made sandwich, or, you want to go support somebody, or you want to, make a sandwich with them, or something.
Or you actually have more time to go get a sandwich, right?
Or maybe there's a way that the universal basic income, or some kind of way. This is why, where did universal basic income start? Started in Silicon Valley, the big ideas about it, and it was mostly because they could see this shit happening.
Yeah.
They were thinking, you know what, we might have to figure out a transition here where there is going to be a lot of people in transition.
But if everyone gets $2,000 a month, that's the bottom, and that's zero.
Yeah, but we don't know if that's
2,000
true,
now.
so.
But what if with this new politics, someone says there's a living wage of,
Yeah.
remember, the other thing I was thinking about was interesting. remember when we were fighting for, like, everyone was screaming, like, wouldn't it be awesome if we get $15 an hour? Like, that was only like 5 years ago, like, fight for 15, and now it's like everybody's getting more than that because, you know, it's post-pandemic. And I mean, shit moves faster than I think than we think, you know, things that we think, oh, that's how it was, can get shifted through politics in other kind of ways pretty quickly. So I would just say, as much as that's a really important question, and there's a lot of people are going to be worrying about 1,000 versions of that, we can figure it out. So
Fine.
that's where I would go with
Yeah,
it.
final question, Shelley, you had something? Oh, was it Katrina?
No, it's okay.
Huh?
Shelley's got a question. No?
Hold on. Wait.
So we've spoken a lot about like politics and branding and kind of especially like people really listening to brands, especially in this day and age. I myself am a millennial. I know that I do it, the Gen Zs particularly as well. I have, however, noticed, like, especially with politics, people's common sense is like decreasing. So it's kind of like they say one thing, everyone believes them. I'm from the UK, obviously, and in Brexit, people, I feel like, finally woke up to it, and they were like, okay, the government's lying to us. Come COVID, they then blindly believed everything that was being said, so it completely flipped back. But I was just wondering, with the use of AI more and more, and you're right, I mean, I've used it a million times, it makes my writing beautiful, but at what point is it going to start impacting universally everyone's common sense a lot more than it currently already is?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, we don't know. I mean, I will say, when I was, the social media beginnings, I've watched all these junctures. I've been through them from the early 90s, right? So I remember when the early YouTube, the early Twitter, the early Facebook. I remember getting on Facebook right after I was coming out of college, and I was doing a lot of politics at that time with the Obama campaign and stuff. Anyhow, the early days of that thing, and I kept focusing on all the positive things, like, oh, this is amazing, you can reach all these people at the same time, and you know, isn't this cool? You can connect up with your family and, you know, get birthday wishes from grade school kids, friends. Anyhow, there were a million things that were just giddy about it, how cool it was. But then, you know, we didn't see that, oh my God, you could manipulate an election with that, and not only you, but somebody from Russia could do it. So yeah, there's a lot of unintended consequences that we got to think through. But I think I will say this about it, is I think we're getting better and better at the idea that right now at the beginning of this, we're already thinking about the negative implications, or how could it, unintended consequences, or, you know, who's going to be left behind and all that. That was not happening in the early 90s,
Right.
early mid-90s. There was no conversation about that. It was all just like gung-ho if you were doing it. There was a lot of people thinking, this isn't going to amount to much. But there was not people thinking, oh my God, that's going to screw up our elections.
What was the most destructive technology of the last several hundred years? The printing press, right?
Yeah.
It caused wars, it
Yeah.
caused schisms, it caused
religious,
religious factionism. The printing press has been impacting us for hundreds of years at this point, and we're kind of finally over it because nobody prints anything anymore. But how many of you are over social media, right? Like, exactly. It's like it's not going to last for 100 years. We're smarter than that. We're talking about it, as you say. You know, we're talking about these things. You know, who is being left behind? What are the impacts on younger women, especially with social media. So these things are getting discussed partly because social media allows us to discuss the impacts of social media. One last thing, Chris, and then we're gonna break back around to more drinking and eating.
Social media comment, and also to your printing press comment. I actually did my graduate thesis, one of my graduate theses, one of my degrees, on the French Revolution and the phenomenon of printed pamphlets. And printed pamphlets during that time were exactly what social media is now, even worse, because it caused people to get their heads cut off.
Yeah.
And so they were already doing this. They'd already thought of the negative uses of mass disinformation, 200-300 years ago. So this is nothing new. Humans have been doing this forever.
And what arose out of that were libel laws. And so if you printed something that was not true, again, this started in the UK, but this is where the libel laws started, where it's like, wait a minute, you can't just do that.
Yeah, and
Right?
professional journalism became a thing after that because people
Yeah.
came to recognize the quality and the veracity of certain publications over others, and
Yeah.
those fake news places went out of business.
This reminds me too, like, the other thing is, we all think it's never been worse, in America, but like, if you go to the early, early Revolutionary
Alexander
War
Hamilton.
period, like Jefferson was, he was accused of the craziest thing. It was like the worst of social media, and he would blow it back and Sam Adams, and the whole thing. It's like we kind of forget a little bit. And the UK, my wife's a Brit too, so I mean, it's like that whole history of crazy back and forth political screaming matches. It's like it's not clear to me that social media has crossed a threshold that hasn't been crossed before. And it's also not clear to me that we will necessarily get beyond it. I think it could evolve into a kind of way that we could have more civilized social media and ways to communicate. What I think of social media is, how do you actually communicate with large numbers of friends and family?
Or the scary part would be what happens when AI gets applied to social media. I mean, or
But what if it's a solution to it? Maybe-
to robocalls.
Maybe there's a way to solve it too.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Anyhow, thanks everybody. It was
Yeah,
great.
thank you, everyone. Thank you, Steve.